Were we live 5 minutes ago?
And welcome back, folks.
No.
This is House Corrections and Institutions Committee. And we are, just the bill looks like it's getting longer and longer. We are going back to H 550. And we have a new draft, which is 2.1. Why did it change from 1.3 to 2.1?
Because some of the changes discussed this morning in 1.4 are different in this version. Generally, we go up in the number before the period, but because there had been some subcommittee versions under version 1, now we are on like a new committee version. So we're on 2.1.
Oh.
There was a method to the madness.
There is in your world. Our method to the madness is quite different, but we have it too. So Hillary, welcome. And this is Wednesday, March 11th, it's our afternoon meeting. So why don't you quickly give us the changes? I'm assuming they're highlighted, but maybe not.
So
A little bit.
yes, there were two versions that I sent, one of which had all the full internal edits. But given the committee's limited time this week, I think it will be easiest to use the clean version, and I will point out where the key changes are. But Tate has a yellow highlighted internal edits version if anyone wants to see every internal edit between versions.
I think I'm fine. Keep it up.
You might.
I got it. You got it too.
I did. We all got this. Well,
Right.
whoever gets the,
I write some paper copies.
we got it.
Perfect. And this clean version does have, still has a few highlights because there are a few areas that we had kind of put a pin in testimony yesterday to return to discuss. So I wanted to make sure that we did not forget these as we move through it.
Thank you.
So for the record, Hillary Cheddar Ames for the Office of Legislative Counsel. We have draft 2.1 of H 550. This reflects changes discussed during yesterday's testimony and changes discussed this morning with respect to section, what is, was 7, and I think still is, now it is section 6. But I will flag that this version does not contain the medical care section, but it sounds like the committee might still be interested in taking testimony on that.
Yes.
So the version 1.3 has that language for purposes of tomorrow morning's testimony. And if the committee's direction is to put that back in, we can certainly do that on the next.
So for tomorrow morning,
Mhm.
we have Dr. Euliger will want to work on our previous draft, which was 1. Right? It was 1.3.
Correct.
So we're still trying to figure out what to do, if we have enough time to do the work that's needed.
Exactly. So however the committee decides after tomorrow morning, we will kind of merge versions as appropriate, reflect that on the next round. So draft 2.1, the intent section has not changed from version 1.3, that's section 1. Section 2 were the general definitions. There are some changes here in numbering to reflect removing definitions that were in sections that were removed. So healthcare professional is not included here now because if the 28 VSA section 801 amendments are not in the bill, then the bill does not need to define healthcare practitioner. So for the definition section, that was the key change made. But the definitions themselves are not different from the version discussed yesterday. So I think the committee can still consider any of the testimony or policy considerations about including definitions and how, but there are not changes in the definition section for walkthrough purposes.
So this was one of the sections the DOC had concerns about keeping these definitions, putting these definitions in statute. And this would be in Title 28. which deals specifically with corrections. So these definitions would only be appropriate when it's pertaining to corrections. It's not used in other sections of law, be it DCF, or Department of Mental Health, or Department of Motor Vehicles, or any other place in statute, except if there was a reference to another place in statute. So this is specific to POC. So we went around this yesterday, and the committee came down on the side of keeping the definitions in. And we're still there.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right, moving forward to,
so be aware, folks. We're gonna get this bill out. We're just gonna do a line by line. It's gonna take a long time to read this, line by line. And whatever we've agreed to at this point, when there's time, we're not taking a lot of testimony, will be a lot more tomorrow. We're gonna spend a lot of time reading and interpreting the language.
I would suggest taking it home tonight and reading it maybe once or twice.
People will
So you're
do.
ready to go. We have the,
You're gonna have to read this, because this is gonna be a lot of work to walk this through on the floor. And whoever's reporting it will need a lot of backup from the rest of us. And Gina has offered to report it. And we're not gonna leave her hanging out there. I mean, she's not gonna take recesses, and she's not gonna yield to the chair. It's gonna be all of us working together to support her on the floor.
I like how you emphasize.
Go.
You go.
Not to yield to the chair.
You can yield to the member from Springfield.
No, not even yield to.
you can
I may
even,
be sitting in the
you
Senate,
can even do it 3 times.
but we're gonna support our committee on the floor.
Absolutely.
Okay.
so for section 3, this is the section that has 2 pieces. One is the department ensuring that individuals are addressed in a manner consistent with their gender identity. And the second piece is non-discrimination. So there's one change requested in testimony yesterday, that on page 5, line 6, this is subdivision A1C, that for transgender, gender diverse, or intersex individuals, comma, that's new language to clarify that the individuals who are requesting the gender of staff who may perform a lawful search are transgender, gender diverse, or intersex individuals.
Instead of saying,
Instead of just saying, the department shall ask everyone their request as to the gender of staff who may perform a lawful search. The only other change, or not a change, but I think the next piece in section 3 to flag for discussion, this is page 5, line 17. This is in all verbal and written communications that involve the use of the individual's pronoun and honorific, department staff, contractors, and volunteers shall not consistently fail to use the gender pronoun and honorific an individual has specified. So this is a more specific way to say the kind of principle at the beginning of this section, which is that the department shall ensure that each individual is addressed consistent with their gender identity. Testimony yesterday flagged that some department volunteers are clergy. There would be a potential issue with requiring someone to go against their religious beliefs. So for the committee's discussion, how to handle this, this specific language is covered by the general principle in subsection A. So one option is to leave in the bill the general principle in subsection A without further specifying the shall not consistently fail.
so for the committee, can you show what you're talking about in subsection A? So people
Yep.
understand how the sections are connected.
Yes, so I'm highlighting it. Yeah, perfect. Highlighting the language in subsection A. Highlighting it very poorly, I'm sorry.
Page 4.
Yes, this is the bottom of page 4. It's not the way to go. All right. the department shall ensure each individual is addressed in a manner consistent with the individual's gender identity. Something we had talked about yesterday is that there are kind of broader principal ways to express something and more specific prohibition or requirement ways to state something. And this language in subsection A establishes the principle that this language in subdivision 4 says in a different and more particular way, but it covers the principle for statutory purposes. So one option for the committee to avoid this issue with requiring volunteers with religious beliefs to potentially speak in a way that is not consistent with their beliefs is to rely just on the principle in subsection A and not include subdivision 4. Another alternative could be to not list volunteers in this specific prohibition. The trade-offs there, including the principle, means that for statutory purposes, there's no suggestion that anyone is excluded, and it lets DOC policy handle on a more individual basis what is appropriate. If the statute refers to department staff, contractors, but not volunteers, there's some suggestion that it isn't intended to cover volunteers.
Right.
So if the committee's intent is for it to cover as broadly as possible, it may be preferable to just use the language in subsection A, that is that general principle, and not use language in subdivision 4. There may also be other potential ways to address this, but those are the ones I can suggest for now. But I would not recommend, given the testimony that the committee heard, that some volunteers are clergy, leaving it as is would pose some risks.
Well, and then Gina.
Yeah, I just, with the volunteer part, and it's a good note to make about the clergy being, considered volunteer. I just, my only question would be, I think that volunteers, and I'm assuming clergy, they fall under professional conduct, just like a profession, like a doctor or a lawyer. Is there a current statute around something like this, like in other titles or different sections?
Interesting. So this is a First Amendment issue, effectively. Ways that you can restrict First Amendment rights. There are different rules for government employees. There are not necessarily different, there are not different rules for lawyers or doctors or by profession. So the fact that some volunteers might be regulated as a professional matter would not extend to their First Amendment rights.
Right, okay. Well, I guess what I'm trying, and obviously I think also using the word restrict, I think I'm trying to create more like, how do we respect their First Amendment rights?
Yeah.
Because again, this is their religious beliefs, and it could, I don't want to say counteract, but it could, be a gray area. But I'm just, I'm trying to think, I don't want to get too into the weeds of it, but.
I think that is a potential advantage of having the statute provide the broad and firm principle to DOC that will guide their policy and decision-making. So A is broad and affirmative that the department shall ensure each individual is addressed in a manner consistent with the individual's gender identity. Having that in statute means that DOC is guided in decision-making about selecting and allowing volunteers, the kinds of conduct that it expects of volunteers, but it lets the department do that on an individualized basis and as needed, and in a way that is not teeing up a challenge in a statute.
Right.
But it's still, that principle is a guiding force for whatever DOC policy or decision-making happens, right? So it's still, I'll defer to DOC here, whether they have specific examples or want to add anything there, but that is the benefit of a broad principle in statute.
So if you go to 4
Yeah.
on page 5, does that gives more ability to tee up for a charge against the department?
If it includes volunteers, potentially, yes. So if on its face it says volunteers shall not consistently fail, without going into very detailed considerations of how exactly that could come up as a challenge, because there would be details, that would pose a risk to have it in there.
Troy,
I think we just take volunteers out right there and let DOC handle it on their own policy basis within the guidelines. It just out of section 4, just take that out right there. And then the rest is still in there as kind of a nod to, you know, how serious we are about this being in written and verbal communications with staff. And just, you know, allow DOC to resolve how they treat, you know, a situation with a volunteer.
Alice, could Josh?
Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead.
Troy, and then I'll go to you, Josh.
Okay. First of all, you've got a pop-up window on the screen over here. I don't know if you can see it on your laptop.
I can't.
There, it's right there.
Oh, perfect.
Oh,
No, hit
on.
What happened?
There we go.
Wow.
Sorry, first time highlighting in a PDF here.
So,
So,
so 4 kind of our section A, subsection A already gets us there to a broader extent. First, before I kind of play with what Gina's suggesting, what does 4 get us in advance in addition to that, to A?
it's a more specific direction to the department. So the broad principle, I would say, like, doesn't require that the department put 4 into policy.
Okay.
Specifically, right? Like, it means that if the department is making a decision or drafting a policy, it needs to keep that broad principle in mind. The department couldn't enact policy that conflicted with that.
Right.
Or, you know, shouldn't be enacting policy that conflicts with that direction, but it wouldn't affirmatively require the department
Right,
necessarily to adopt something like what is in subdivision 4.
But if we're ensuring, as A subsection A requires, if we're ensuring that each individual is addressed in a manner consistent with their gender identity, that should, by default, include verbal and written communications, correct?
I think a reasonable interpretation
Yeah.
would be that. I think DOC could probably best speak to if they think they
Yeah.
would interpret A in any particular way. I just think, you know, if you have subdivision 4 in there, DOC couldn't have a policy that omitted written communications for some reason
Right,
that they
right.
have. It
Yeah.
would let them have a policy that speaks a little more broadly or works a little bit differently.
If we just remove volunteers, we are deliberately, or we're definitely creating a potential loophole. I don't know if it would ever show up, but we are creating one. So I'm wondering if we just get rid of 4 altogether.
Yeah, can I throw in another curveball?
Yeah.
Yes, when we say contractors, is that contractors through DOC or is that contractors through BGS doing work within a facility? Because there are contractors out there that do work, maintenance, renovations that are in contact at times with folks who are incarcerated.
Are they contracting with the Department of Corrections or with BGS?
But they're in the facility.
So one way to specifically I think the best read of the statute is that it is contractors specifically with the Department of Corrections. But I think to be very clear about that, line 16 would say department staff, comma, department contractors, comma, and volunteers, but not volunteers. So department staff and department contractors. Or if you're removing the period, then department staff and contractors is also best read as including just department contractors.
Troy, and then I'm gonna go to.
Yeah, so on that line, let's say a BGS contractor is in the facility adding Wi-Fi that we funded, okay?
It makes some side remarks.
Right, and the department is made aware that, hey, the BGS employees are not consistently using the pronouns that I've asked to be used. the department still has a duty to ensure, right? And for me, back to your reasonable interpretation of A, my expectation is that statute would require the department then to pull BGS aside and say, look, we've got policy here, and this person is using these pronouns or prefers this name. You have an obligation to use it. You can do this because we're informing you that, or we can involve BGS leadership, right? That's, to me, ensuring that an individual is addressed appropriately.
I see nodding from Josh.
Yeah, so- If you could introduce yourself for the record.
For the record, Joshua Rutherford, Facilities Division Deputy Director. Couple of different things to unpack in that. In terms of contractors, folks like BGS contractors don't regularly interact with the population very much. That's not their role when they're there. However, when they are there, they are subject to reasonably following our rules, including things like what you can bring in the building, how you can interact with our population, whether it has to do with gender or not. We could have someone coming in saying other offensive things to our population, and we would, as Representative Hedrick suggests, address that with them or with the leadership or our folks from our building. We've done all of those things. I do have concerns about simply striking volunteers entirely, because we would want to hold all volunteers to this standard unless there was a specific reason around a sincerely held religious belief where we felt we couldn't. So I think A gives us the general principle and not just the principle, an obligation. I think there's an affirmative obligation in there for us to do it. But if, say, in consultation with the general counsel, we can't, for First Amendment rights, enforce that against this religious volunteer who's providing a service to a religious community in our facility, then I think we would be able to defend why in this specific case we didn't do it, but still hold everyone else to that standard.
Connor and then Brian.
I'm afraid to bring this up. Might open up another can there. We don't really specify inmates and how they treat other inmates in this legislation, right? And I would imagine that could get, if a volunteer is dicey on First Amendment grounds, probably an inmate is even dicier, right? Because they're not even in there through. Josh is shaking his head, but I would think it would be difficult for First Amendment to tell inmates you have to use these pronouns.
Less difficult.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Huh.
depending on the setting, there is more scope to limit a variety of rights. But for First Amendment rights, if you are in a school, there are some things that you can tell school children they cannot say that you could not tell someone on the street they cannot say. And similarly, in a correctional setting, the standard for like the rationale you would need to justify restricting speech is a lower justification. You still have to impose justification, and this is a can of worms in terms of like going into the different legal standards, and there's some shifting law there. But generally, if you have a penological justification, like a reasonable correctional reason why you are doing that thing, courts will allow you to do it.
So even if an inmate said, this is against my religion, I'm not here voluntarily, and you're making me say this to somebody else.
So I think part of the reason the bill does not necessarily go into covering inmates is that I think that is not settled law one way or another. Just as kind of background to your broader point of, don't inmates have greater rights than volunteers? In some ways, no, but for this particular purpose, potentially.
Brian and then Will.
So it seems like most of what we're talking about right now, if I can do shorthand, is the difference, if there is one, between A at the bottom of page 4 and then 4 on page 5, right? Do we need 4 on page 5? And to the degree that this bill is a result of things that have actually happened in testimony that we've heard, I think 4 on page 5 is meant to address those circumstances where somebody, again and again, like if I'm addressing Hedrick there, okay, ma'am, intentionally doing that. I think that's covered by A. And so while 4 may have been there for that reason, and I can understand its inclusion, I don't think we lose anything by getting rid of it. It just comes back to an operational choice. And I mean, as much as I want to dot all my I's and cross all my T's, I don't think we can in this case. And I think you lose more by including 4. So let's leave it out.
Well,
Going back to Connor's point about the inmates, how, well, I guess my question is more about, is that state or federal case law that determined?
Generally federal because First Amendment constitutional. So there could still be some Vermont case law, depending on what provision of the Vermont Constitution could be at issue. And I am not an expert on the First Amendment in correctional facilities. So if you want lots of details, we will have to bring someone else in or I will have to report back. But generally it's federal case law that we're talking about.
If you want, I can offer some insight on that as well. if you like.
sure.
So we do have existing rules on how incarcerated individuals communicate with each other and staff. And we address inappropriate behavior, threatening statements, derogatory statements, identity-based statements. All of those are disciplinary violations that carry infractions that we've enforced for years. That being said, we cannot hear and interrupt every comment that folks make to each other. And in particular, their ability to use pronouns all the time or use them effectively can be a challenge. But if someone was intentionally being derogatory to somebody for an identity-based reason, we can and do address those. And as going back to my time as chief of security when we first made this change in 2015, that was kind of a big deal. As an officer, if you hear that, address it. Say something, write the disciplinary report, but hold that accountable. And we have had incarcerated folks complain when they felt that staff haven't done that adequately, because they do feel that it is their part of their conditions of confinement that to the extent reasonably possible, we should be protecting them from verbal abuse, knowing that we can't do that 100% of the time in that environment.
So I have a question on A. I want to ensure that each individual. Who are the individuals? Is it just inmates? Is it everyone within the facility? The department shall ensure that each individual is addressed in a manner consistent with the individual's gender identity. So how do we interpret that term individual? Is it just inmates? Is it inmates and staff? Is it everyone who's in and out of the facility?
So as originally drafted, because this was in a section that referred only to folks in custody, it used the word inmate. Because this moved to a broader section that covered, I guess, this part of, because the intent was to have these prohibitions cover the department's work generally, it was moved to this earlier section and inmate was changed to individual. But the chair's point is a good one, that if there is an intent that individual be interpreted narrowly, that we should specify that here. As written, it is has broad application.
A lot of individuals in a facility, and there's a lot of individuals that come and go out of that facility. I'm thinking like recovery coaches. I'm thinking Prin coming in. I'm thinking maybe some folks coming in with art classes, some coming in with music classes. Then you've got your staff, your ongoing staff. Then you have the folks who live there 24/7. So I'm just want to put that out there. How are we thinking it? Try.
I'm fine keeping it broad. I think we're creating a culture here where respect and dignity are ensured. And I don't think that is contained for one population, whether that's the inmates or the workers or the visitors. So.
Yeah, and I had that was kind of a question I had yesterday that you're touching on. It's like, I was wondering, should we take into consideration a DOC employee being gender diverse or transgender or intersex? So I was thinking about that yesterday and last night. So it hits, I do feel that we need to think about that.
So I'm going to say this for the record. Is our legislative intent that the term individual is broad? and not specific towards inmates or staff, but it is broad. Is that our legislative intent?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Saying that on the record,
Yes, I wasn't sure how we were defining individual though. I'm fine with that being the intent, but just,
well, I'm saying this on the record in
Yeah.
case there's ever anything in court, and they have to come back to legislative intent.
Right.
That's why we have things on the record.
that's included.
So
Yep.
is that, are people in this committee, our legislative intent is the term individual is to be interpreted broadly?
Yes.
Yes.
One other way to further emphasize that in the statutory language could be to say the department shall ensure that all individuals are addressed in a manner consistent with their gender identity.
Perfect,
That's clearer.
perfect.
I don't want any ambiguity.
Well, because I'm thinking like, what if there's a transgender, correctional officer who actually isn't put in charge of doing the searches, which could be like, I don't know if that exists.
Does.
Oh, well, there you go. So like, okay, so that's,
For officers as well. I know we have.
yeah, so.
Yeah, we have correctional officers who are gender diverse, transgender, and we honor their pronouns the same way that we do our incarcerated population. because
Okay.
that's how we treat people respectfully.
Right,
and
right.
appropriately. I will say the broader issue of searches, in terms of gender diverse folks as staff is an area of definitely open law in the country with some contradictory rulings. So that is a bridge as a profession that we have not managed yet. But in terms of, we respect folks' identity as they identify it to us. Right.
So read that language again, that the department shall ensure that,
All individuals are addressed in a manner consistent with their gender identity.
so does that make it clearer there and therefore we don't need number 4?
That's
Yeah.
what Brian was
Yes.
saying.
Yes.
That's what Brian, and I agreed with his
So we
suggestion.
take out number 4?
Yep.
You got volunteers out of there, Gina. Long way around. Okay,
Well done, Madam Chair.
well, I don't know about that. Got to navigate it.
The beauty of testimony and revision.
It's looking at it at the same time. So number 5,
Will now be number 4.
do we want number 5?
But it has volunteers in it as well.
Shall ensure department staff, contractors, and volunteers receive gender responsive training. Well,
So I think we may have touched on this a minute ago, but when I hear the word training, is there a financial implication of that?
well, department staff for correctional officers academy, that's already implicit within their training. I don't know what you do for your administrative staff. Contractors, I just don't know.
There is training for those folks, especially for volunteers, for contractors, depending on what their role is in the building. Because a nurse or a mental health provider is going to be different than the guy who is there to fix the refrigerator. But there is training in terms of everybody's obligations under PREA. And basic sort of safety. And so I think some of that gender responsive is already built into that. We can certainly look at it. But I don't see that we already have to provide some training to those folks based on their role.
And the one difference there in terms of mentioning volunteers is that an obligation for the department to provide training to all volunteers is different for legal purposes than requiring all volunteers to not consistently fail to use the right pronouns, right? It's an obligation on the department to provide and not necessarily on the volunteers, which I think situates it differently.
So probably a question for Josh. So somebody goes in for a day to do a voter registration drive. Are they getting trained up in this?
So our voter registration folks, interestingly, are certified volunteers. So they've already had training.
You have to go.
I see.
You have to-
I am more concerned about repairmen, because
Right.
training for them is pretty slim. Because you're not having much contact with anybody. Or, you're not addressing our population very much, but, yeah, like the League of Women Voters is coming in to do voter registration, but those are certified, trained volunteers. They've already had their training.
So any volunteer that goes into a facility has to work with that volunteer
The
director,
volunteer coordinator,
volunteer coordinator in the facility, and they are screened. There's quite a screening process there on that level. I mean, even in Springfield, I'm going to use this example with, there's recovery coaching
Yep.
happening there through our local Turning Point. And our police chief in Springfield wanted to be one of those folks going into the facility, working with a recovery coach. He had to go through an extensive volunteer screening process with a volunteer coordinator in the facility before he could be approved to come into the facility to do that. So it's there for that. Joe?
But I would presume refrigerator repair guy or overhead door guy. It's probably not gonna, I mean, overhead door company, you're just, the corollary would be, nobody's gonna come fix your overhead doors.
right, and that is where I, because contractors includes both those folks who fix things and those folks who directly deliver services, that does cause me a little bit of concern
Reasonable, yeah.
in that,
Need to tweak that, I think.
how we cross that, because the language doesn't differentiate it.
So if you're going in there and you're doing door lock replacements, or you're doing a renovation to a break room, you're bringing in some electrical circuits in there. You're working with BGS on that. Usually. Do they have any training of their contractors in terms of gender?
I'm not prepared to speak to that.
Well,
So that would be one
The
question.
distinction might be contractors delivering direct service to incarcerated individuals.
And what would some of those direct services to incarcerated individuals?
So that's certainly all our medical and mental health providers, that's the biggest one, but also some of the folks who deliver our risk intervention services programming. And those folks all get more expensive.
Or recovery coaching?
Well, those are mostly volunteers, I think, but yes, same, I mean, either way, whether you call them contractors or volunteers. But those folks, we certainly would want to have the more extensive training, so that they're acting in accordance with sort of the values and the obligations.
Can we
It
just
is
say,
those smaller contractors, not that they should be walking around our facility saying things willy-nilly, but
Yeah.
how much training we're going to give to somebody who's there for that purpose poses a challenge.
So.
Yeah.
Joe had his hand.
go ahead, Troy.
I'm just gonna say, can we say proportional to their service delivery, to their level of service, proportional to their level of service provided or something like that?
Proportional to their level of interaction.
Yeah.
Also
Yeah.
could say, like, if you're in a place where you're interacting, whether it's service delivery or otherwise.
That would give us, I think, the room to target it to what folks are doing.
Yeah, it wasn't random that I spoke about overhead door repair guys. I have a buddy who's an overhead door repair guy who does work in some of the facilities, and frankly, the company, they just hate going there. The technicians don't, because they gotta count on the screwdrivers and the bolts, and I get that, but it's very aggravating for them. And then you throw some other hurdles, and like, these guys are busy, they're just gonna say, you know what, I don't wanna work for DOC. But I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah, I could see a few other loopholes in this language, right? BGS employee doesn't work for the Department of Corrections department, isn't technically a contractor, they're a state employee, and they're not a volunteer. Joe Ager could be spending a lot of time, not serving.
Perhaps.
Oh, there's, ultimately, the department is still called, obligated to ensure, we still go back to A. Right?
It's still,
So BGS is in there and they are not being respectful. The department still has an obligation to say, you're not being respectful.
okay, yeah.
You be respectful.
Yes.
So if that's the question, do we need 5 at all, or should we just have A be more all encompassing?
That's training though, right?
This is training.
I do like the fact that volunteers are getting some training on, this is how we do it at DOC. This is how we do gender, for example.
I might be overthinking it.
And the normal person isn't gonna think of BGS, but we are, because we live it.
Did you say we're normal?
Oh, the normal person.
The average.
The average person. BGS, sometimes there are BGS employees that go in there and do the work. Other times BGS is contracting out with a construction company.
Yeah.
To do the
Mhm.
work. So you got two different scenarios there with BGS.
I think to Representative Hedrick's point, I think A does still put that obligation on us, the same as it would if, you know, somebody's in there saying derogatory things about sex offenders or about folks who are incarcerated in general, like we wouldn't tolerate that behavior. And so I think that still gives us that tool. We just wouldn't be required to provide training to BGS staff, which I don't mind not having as an obligation on the department.
Agreed.
So where are we with number 5? Do we
I'm
keep,
good. Yeah.
we keep it in, but we tweak it a little bit in terms of some language that proportional to their interaction or something to that end?
And do we need to put it at the discretion of DOC to determine that proportionality?
Well, it says the department shall ensure.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the default would be that the department is
Yes.
determining proportional. But, so I think the option I mentioned was department shall ensure department staff, contractors, and volunteers receive gender responsive training proportional to their level of interaction with inmates.
So I realized I was out of the room for a meeting, but when contractor, is the intention for the word contractor here to be the service guy? Or is contractor meant to be the provider of a service to an inmate?
It's
And
both.
is it?
Well,
But
contractor.
I know what it says, but was that the intention?
Yeah, well, one of the contractors is WellPath.
But that's a service provider to the inmates, not somebody who's working on an overhead door. So is the term contractor in this case need to be more specific that it is service providers, or was it the intention that it's supposed to cover the labor, the blue collar, worker too? Like, that's what I'm asking, because there's different kinds of contractors. And so what was the intention?
One thing that came up earlier, maybe with respect to 4, but if the intention is to specify department contractors, so I think 3 groups Josh mentioned as contracting directly with the department who do in effect provide services, I think department contractors would be distinguished from a BGS contractor coming in. So if you want to narrow that somewhat, could say department contractors. And if you wanted to be particularly specific about,
I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, let's think this through. So if you narrow that to DOC contractors, people who contract directly with DOC, then they would receive training in proportion to their level of interactions with inmates. And you'd only be incorporating those contractors that the department contracts with directly. If you leave it broader, you're saying that the department would ensure that there's some gender responsive training proportional to their interaction with inmates. So some of those contractors may not have any interaction with inmates, and some may have some. So that would be the difference if you narrowed it to DOC contractors only versus other folks. So where's the committee? Does it not matter, or does it matter?
I think with the qualifier personality, it doesn't, I think we're good.
With the qualifier of the
Yeah.
personality? To keep general just to keep the word
Oh, fine.
contractor and not define it, not narrow it down? Josh is nodding.
Yeah, I think that works, and it also allows us to target sort of our staff, because some staff have lots of direct contact. Some staff have almost none, or none at all. Some of our folks who do finance, like we still have obligations for them as in state employees, but they don't have to get that training around how to interact with incarcerated folks because they don't.
And contractors aren't really supposed to have any direct contact either, right, Josh? Or but
It
they're
really depends on what the
right.
contract is. Like the overhead door guy, no,
Right.
really shouldn't have any.
It's a part of the contractor.
Kids are part,
Yeah, okay.
the mental health provider, like those folks, very much so. So I do like the proportionality language, because it allows us to target it to what is the person doing in the building.
Okay.
Are there for the educational piece, are there folks who, and I'm thinking of the old model community high school in Vermont, for the teachers, are they also just employees of DOC or? are
Yeah,
they-
they're employees of the department, correct?
So they're not working as teachers in a public system?
And we have a public, like we have a certified high school. But I think contractors in that firm would include like, CCB. Would either be contractors or volunteers because they don't work for the department, but they do deliver services in our building.
What about CCA?
But just.
Oh, okay, I was looking at.
Yeah, no, I think whether the accountant is volunteers or contractors, probably contractors, but either way, they fall under that. They're not Vermont DOC employees, but all the correctional educators are DOC employees.
I'm sorry, I was focused on.
That's okay.
I thought I heard CCV, but I wasn't sure what's going on there. So,
And if anybody is sort of missing that loophole, we still have A above, which establishes a broad obligation on the department for anybody who's interacting with the population.
so the proposal is for 5, to keep it the same as it is, but only to add a proportional to their interactions with inmates.
Right.
Does that work for folks?
Yes.
Okay, let's keep going.
Right. We are now at the top of page 6. This is the second part of section 3, subsection B, non-discrimination. So just a reminder, this started with language saying the department, shall not make placement decisions based on any discriminatory reason. There was a question about specifying what that meant. The last draft suggested any other discriminatory reason, meaning based on any legally protected category. There was some testimony yesterday that some decisions might in fact be based in part or largely in part on mental health was an example, which could be, not in all cases, but could be a legally protected category. So I think the question for the committee here is, are there specific discriminatory bases that we want, that we are trying to exclude here? And should we list them? Or one option that I think we still might want to hear DOC testimony on, but one other option was trying to limit the language to say solely. So the option here is the department's decision not to accommodate an individual's search, classification, housing, or programming placement request shall not be based solely on 1, which there hasn't been any concerns about, 2, any other discriminatory reason, meaning based on any legally protected category.
I have a hard time interpreting what 2 says. The way it's written, I'm just having a really hard time. And I had a hard time yesterday interpreting this. So the placement request shall not be based solely on the anatomy. That makes sense. And it shouldn't be based on a legally protected category? Is that what that's saying?
So I think yes. So I think the intent originally in the draft was to have some really broad anti-discrimination language, which makes sense. I think the challenge is that as applied, there are actually some scenarios where DOC is considering something that in other contexts is a legally protected category, like a mental health condition, that is part of how they're thinking about whether a placement is appropriate. That's at least how I understood some testimony we heard yesterday. And if that's the case, this language would be a challenge because it's saying DOC cannot do that. I think adding solely is a new word from the previous language. That means that the department could still consider something like mental health as part of its overall picture, but it couldn't make the decision like the determining factor could not be mental health.
Just wonder if that could be worded so young. Maybe it's only me, but I'm really having a hard time understanding number 2. And maybe it's just me.
I think if other than broadly saying, you know, the department should not be discriminating, if there's something specific that this is intended to prevent, like the department should not be, I mean, 1 is very specific. So the question might just be, is there another, either a specific legally protected category that the department should not be making decisions based on? Because I think otherwise the language doesn't provide clear direction to DOC and might, it sounds like, could create a problem because there is some consideration of at least the one example of mental health.
So what are some of the protected categories, the DOC? And I'm just thinking through this, that you would house, you could house someone in administrative seg.
Yeah.
Because either to protect themselves, it could be disciplinary seg because the discipline, they're not abiding by the rules of the facility. It could be a mental health unit. Could be the infirmary. It could be the geriatric unit.
Those latter 3 are all potentially based on protected categories. And in fact,
It
it is often the primary reason, you know, when we put somebody in an infirmary, it's because they have a serious medical condition or possibly a disability. When we put someone in a geriatric unit, certainly age is a primary consideration. So I think perhaps like sexual orientation isn't a reason why we should be determining where somebody's living. And that might be sort of what's being thought here, or one of the things being thought here. But in particular, on actually age in the other end in terms of youth, we make specific decisions about how we house young folks. And those are all potentially protected categories that absolutely do affect housing determinations.
So
And a seg is not so much a protected, it's more of an administrative.
And we wouldn't put anybody in seg for, I can't think of how we put somebody in seg for one of those sort of protected reasons.
But they could be put in seg.
They could be put in seg, but it wouldn't be for that reason.
It might be to protect them from being harassed or not. Because it could be, because testimony we've received in the past when we've looked at seg is for administrative seg could be they're not abiding by the rules of the facility, or sometimes you might put them in there for their safety.
Yeah, there is
because being targeted.
There is a protective custody thing. That's, I would say that that's not ever solely identity based, in that we have folks of all sorts of different identities who live in general population. A specific person may be being targeted in part based on their identity. And in those cases, we'd want to, and I think PREA set some rules on limiting that, but we'd want to find another housing assignment other than protective custody for that person. Although in a short term, that might be, but even then it wouldn't be, we're not putting this person in there because they're transgender. We're putting this person in there because the assessment situation right now is that this individual is in danger.
Right.
Um,
That's what I'm trying to, that's why I put this out on the table, because these are all little nuances that are happening out there in terms of how you house folks. And I want to allow the flexibility for DOC, but also to be respectful of the accommodations for the individual. And that might be in conflict with what the individual wants, but what DOC is really needing in terms of the safety for that person and the security of the facility. That's my concern.
I think
Does that make sense, Josh?
it makes sense to me, and I like the legally protected category, except where it runs into areas where we actually do have to use that information.
So I think one question to ask in thinking about how to handle B, and especially B2, or B insofar as it includes 2, is what are the bases that this bill intends to tell the department it cannot make these decisions based on? it's clear that they cannot make it based on solely on anatomy, but given the testimony that there are some legally protected categories that the department has reasons to consider in their decisions, what are the categories that the bill intends to say, department, you cannot make a decision based on this? Because my suggestion is that if we don't have a specific example, including the broad language is going to create more challenges than provide clarity.
Isn't there an infinite list of things? You can't deny it because you don't like the color of their eyes. I mean,
Not a legally protected category.
No, but
Yes,
that's what I'm saying. The list is.
without referencing legally protected category, it could be very broad. Legally protected category, as drafted, would include, there are a couple of Vermont laws and a proposed constitutional amendment that mention specific protected categories, and this would reference any of them. So it is a discrete list. And looking back on it, other than I think Josh mentioned, sexual orientation could be a specific one to prohibit, but other than that, I think it's just a trade-off of, it wasn't clear to me which protected categories would be something the bill would be telling the department not to consider. And there are several, as mentioned, that the department is considering.
Hillary, I'm just wondering, is it, and I might be missing the point too, but can we split up? Does it help to split up 2 as a sentence into 2 and 3? Like, is it, or any other discretionary reason, or any legally protected category? Does that help, or is that not helping? And you can tell me that was dopey, but I wanted to ask.
I've never used Dopey.
Okay.
I don't think that solves the challenge.
Okay, all right. I was just trying to, because it seems like there's a lot.
The right to use dopey.
Yeah,
You have the right to be stupid.
yeah.
Reserve the right to still use dopey.
Yeah, okay. That was dopey. Well, I'm trying to, like, it seems like there's sometimes sentences that they're, like, anyway.
We love all suggestions.
Okay.
That particular one won't solve the problem.
Okay.
It's why we solved it.
Handle that so well.
But-
Okay.
AKA, what a dope.
So it reads weird to me and why is meaning on there? Like, why can't it be any other discriminatory reason based on legally protected categories? Why is the word meaning in there?
So as written, it's saying, it's trying to keep that kind of broad anti-discriminatory principle. So for any other discriminatory reason, but to be clear what discriminatory reason meant, it's saying essentially any discriminatory reason, which means based on a legally
You
protected
said
category.
which means.
Yes, but that still doesn't solve, that solves James' question, but it doesn't, still doesn't solve the challenge of mentioning any legally protected category when there are in fact some legally protected categories that the department has reasons to consider in these decisions.
Any suggestions from you to?
I think, so my suggestion is if there is a specific legally protected category that the committee intends to tell the department it cannot consider, we should specify, the bill should specify that legally protected category. If there isn't a specific legally protected category, then my recommendation would be to include 1, but remove 2.
Huh.
That doesn't accomplish this kind of a broad statement. I think the challenge is the broad statement includes some things that it shouldn't include. So it's either we specify something or we remove the broader principle.
So I'm leaning towards that, but then maybe beefing up 1.
Okay.
Right? So what we're at here is when a person identifies as, let's just say transgender in this case, there's more gender diverse reasons, but and they've requested an accommodation. So I identify as a trans woman. I'm requesting to be placed at Chittenden Regional. The department has right? Their spidey sense is triggered, and they're like, I don't think we should house this person, despite the fact that they're saying they're a trans woman at CRCF. Right now, if we just left it at 1, they could not use my anatomy to make that decision, or physical characteristics, right? That's essentially saying we're prohibiting the Department of Corrections from saying you don't look like a woman, so we're not going to let this happen. I might get lost now. My thought to talk process. That's what we're trying to protect here, right? That's essentially why this is in this particular bill. I guess my question then is that enough? Is that what we're doing? Is there any other scenario in that instance, and I'll turn to DOC here, where a denial might happen, right? This is essentially what we're protecting, right? But that might be enough, right? That might be enough for a denial, right? Because your spidey senses are up for a reason.
Well, we
Right.
would usually tie that back to behavior, including criminal history, institutional history, things like that. The only other thing that pops out to me is sexual orientation, because surprisingly enough, we do have lesbians at Chittenden. So the idea
Right.
that somebody is
Right.
attracted to women is not a reason we would not let somebody go to Chittenden. So that's the only one that comes to mind. Like, we wouldn't make a decision based on race or religion, but I also don't see it ever coming up in this context either.
Right.
It's just not reasonably related to the topic at hand. Sexual orientation is the one other that sort of gets brought into this because people tend to conflate gender identity and sexual orientation. And we try pretty hard to split those things.
So can you just say or gender diverse category, gender diverse expression, another reason why you would not, why you would deny the request. You can't do that based on anatomy or physical characteristics, or I'm thinking of the broader gender diverse umbrella
Right, well,
category.
if you look at the definition, you
Yeah,
gotta
that's
go
what-
back
that's
to
what
the
I'm wondering, yeah.
definition of gender diverse. It's an individual with a gender identity or expression that is different from social and cultural expectations attributed to the person's sex at birth.
So gender expression could be a way to,
Diverse gender
Just-
expression.
could be a way to, keep one somewhat expansive while being specific.
Yeah,
Um,
and then get rid of 2.
So in that case, subsection B would read, the department's decision
Sure.
not to accommodate an individual's search, classification, housing, or programming placement request shall not be based solely on the anatomy, including the genitalia, other physical characteristics, or diverse gender expression of the individual.
That sounds good, right? Troy?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
I guess
Somebody on the floor will find something.
it's a Gina problem.
Here's the chair.
She can
It's
just
all-
defer to the chair.
Yield to dopey.
No, no.
All right, mindful of our time, any other thoughts for now on this non-discrimination piece? And of course, there'll be new language.
Shot to death.
Well, usefully explored, a potentially challenging area of language, and found a solution that seems to work, at least for purposes of the next draft. Moving on to section 4, this was searches. The testimony yesterday and the decision of the committee was to keep subsections A through C, but to remove what used to be C1, C2, and all of the subsections afterwards. So on pages 6 and 7, you'll see that all that remains are subsections A through C.
That was a rebuttable presumption.
Yes, yep, the first rebuttable presumption, and you'll see there's alternative for the housing section. And then just to keep our conversation about searches in the same place, if you turn to page 15, and we'll scroll down there on my screen
What
as
did I
well.
miss on page 8?
We'll come back to pages 7 through 14, but the search policy review that the committee discussed as part of the searches language in the bill, I think will be session law. So that's why it's the end of the bill on page 15.
Oh,
So this is section 10. This is page 15, lines 7 through 13. So the committee's decision was to keep those first few search sections and then to add.
you got this.
Yeah.
It's different from yesterday. Yeah.
To add section 10, search policy review. So this is page 15, line 8A, on or before August 1st, 2026. And the committee could change that date. Just flagging. The Department of Corrections shall submit a revised search policy to the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee. Subsection B, the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee shall review and recommend whether updates to the policy are warranted and what, if any, statutory changes might be warranted.
Are you suggesting to change that date to make it earlier?
I'm just flagging that
No, I wouldn't do it earlier.
Okay,
so I understood testimony yesterday to mean that the new search policy will be ready at some certain point near in the future. So it didn't seem necessary to push this date out until November or
I
December.
want to do it.
But it also, I tried not to cut it too closely. So if the bill is going into effect in July and there might be a new search policy in the next month or 2 or 3, this would be a relatively timely report date. But I just wanted to flag for the committee that I selected that date and another date, either DOC testimony indicating another date is appropriate or the committee thinking that another date made sense. But that's where I was thinking with August.
I'm just thinking of when we have our meetings.
Mhm.
We have about 6 of them, and it depends when it starts, if it's in June, July. And I don't want to wait long because
Mhm.
we're gonna need more. We only meet once a month, if that. Haley, if you did it by August, on it before August 1st, that would mean doing it in July, having it completed by July. Would August 15th be better?
August.
August 1st is fine. The intention of the commissioner is to have this done. He told us 3 weeks. He is the boss, so it'll be 3 weeks. But that's pretty aggressive. But certainly before the 1st of August. So I think that date's perfectly reasonable.
Got July 15th.
You got.
I mean, we could do it at our first, we could do it at our first meeting, or is that too soon?
I think we can do July 15th. I think we can do July 15th. I think that would be a problem.
what meetings are you talking about?
Joint Justice Oversight.
Oh,
They
okay.
meet 6 times last session.
Got it, and you're on.
I'm chair.
Yes.
So you preferred work to yourself, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm just wondering when we meet, because when our first meeting, depending when we adjourn from the session. Usually we'll have a meeting towards the end of June. Maybe August 1st. Sometimes in the summer, it's kind of weird. We may not meet in July or we may not meet in August. And that's what I'm just trying to figure out. And then to review it and to make any recommended updates, it's going to take a few meetings after that to do that.
Madam Chair, you're the chair, you can make the meetings.
Now, I can make meetings, but we may not have a quorum. That's the problem. Let's keep August 1st. I think that may have flexibility. Okay.
All right, any questions or suggested changes to the section 10 search policy review language?
I think that's a good way out of it. what we were doing yesterday.
Excellent. We will now return to page 7. So those are the search policy changes in this draft. Section 5, this is the classification and housing section that we did not touch on in detail yesterday. But there were 2 recommendations made from yesterday's testimony. One was that DOC testimony suggested that putting this in its own section made most sense. So this is now in a new section, 701C, titled Classification, Housing, and Program Placement Determinations. The other change made here was to offer some alternatives to the rebuttable presumption language so that it was avoiding any questions about whether this implicated the burden of proof. So I will read through, because the committee hasn't read through the subsections A through D, but I'll flag that the decision, other than comments from folks, the decision point will be on alternative language for how DOC is considering someone's requests. Other thing I'll flag, which I didn't earlier in the bill, but there was conversation yesterday about using the word views and asking for some different word. This draft uses requests. Seems to work somewhat well, but if the committee would prefer perspective or thinks that something else is appropriate, we can make that change, but the draft uses request throughout. It also makes the change suggested by the DOC General Counsel that DOC would not accommodate a request as opposed to overrule a request. So the draft also uses the language of not accommodate when it's referring to DOC making a determination contrary to what an individual might request. Should have prefaced that up front. Do you want me to point out where I did that?
You've got the search policy, yeah. So I was trying to.
Maybe you'd like me to have up on my screen the section we're talking
I
about?
was looking at this, and I was trying to follow what you were saying.
Yep. So this is page 7. Sorry, we are back to page 7.
I was trying to work on the old draft, comparing it to the new draft and trying to comprehend what you were saying.
Got it. Well, I clearly need to do a better job of situating ourselves. So yes, this is page 7, section 5. A new is added to read, new section 701C, based on testimony yesterday that a new section was most logical to DOC. Subsection A, this is page 7, line 6. The department shall make classification and housing placement determinations for transgender, gender diverse, and intersex inmates consistent with this section. Throughout this section, it specifies where things are applying to transgender, gender diverse, and intersex inmates, again, based on testimony yesterday, to avoid any confusion about provisions applying more broadly. So that change was made in A. Subsection B, during the initial intake process and in as private a setting as possible, the department shall ask each transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmate to specify the inmate's request as to housing placement. That is an example of where the draft now uses request instead of views.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
They haven't necessarily identified themselves as transgender, diverse, or intersex yet at this point in the process.
So this will come earlier in the statute.
Okay.
If we look back.
Oh, right, during, yeah.
Yep, if we look back to section 129.
Yeah.
During
They
initial
will have-
intake,
okay.
they will ask. There was some discussion, so the provision that I just talked about, or that I just read, B
Yeah.
on page 7, this could be a sub-bullet in that earlier section about initial intake. But there was some subcommittee discussion that placing this all in a housing section
Yep.
would be easiest to understand and perhaps easiest to explain on the floor. So this is placed all within a
This is
housing
housing after
section.
intake. Intake has already accommodated the assertion.
Yes, I think when DOC is reading the statutory changes, they will have a list of things that they, I think, are already doing, but they will have a list of things for intake.
Yep,
And this will
yep.
be on that list along with the
Gotcha.
initial item. So there will already be asking the individual
yep.
how they identify.
Thank you.
So subsection C, the department shall make classification and housing placement determinations for transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmates based on review by a multidisciplinary review panel. The multidisciplinary review panel shall be composed of individuals, including medical personnel, mental health professionals with experience in gender dysphoria or gender affirming care, and personnel who have received training aligned with nationally recognized standards for gender affirming care.
Yeah, consistent with, I mean. Yes,
Subsection D, the department shall consider, sorry, this is page 7, line 19, and I am in fact helping us follow on the screen instead of being on another page. The department shall consider on an individualized basis whether a classification or housing placement would best support a transgender, gender diverse, and intersex inmates' health and safety, and whether the placement would pose risks to safety or security. The department may determine that a classification or housing placement would not best protect health or safety at that time, but may recommend discussing reassessment with the inmate after a specified period. That second sentence came from some subcommittee discussion that sometimes the conversation is ongoing, that for particular reasons, a placement, determining or accommodating the individual's request might not be appropriate for certain reasons at the time, but that the department would handle it by having ongoing conversations. So that second sentence on page 8, lines 1 through 4 was intending to capture that sometimes it's an ongoing conversation.
So how does this, what I can understand the intake process.
Mhm.
So how does A, C, and D work with top of page 6? We just talked about the non-discrimination department decision not to accommodate a person, not to accommodate an individual's classification, housing, placement. How does this play in with what we did at top of page 6B?
It's a great question. On the top of page 6, subsection B, that non-discrimination provision applies more broadly than classification, housing, and program placement. It also applies to searches. So that's why it's in this early section saying the department cannot make any of these decisions based solely on anatomy and the other language that we included there. So this section on page 7 is specific to how classification, housing, and program placement determinations are made. This does not repeat what is in the non-discrimination provision, but what is at the top of page 6 would still apply here because it's applying broadly here and to searches.
Well, they're working together. They're not counter
Exactly.
each other. They're working together.
Subsection A is kind of just explaining how the section works. It's saying if you are making determinations, do so consistent with this section, what follows. B, what happens during initial intake? DOC asks each transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmate to specify the inmate's request as to housing placement. C, how does the department make these decisions? Based on review by a multidisciplinary review panel that shall consist of the listed individuals. And then D is, I guess, part 2 of how does the department make the decision? Maybe C is who makes the decision, the multidisciplinary review panel. And D is how is the department, that panel, deciding what the placement is. So the department shall consider, this is page 7, line 19. The department shall consider on an individualized basis whether a classification or housing placement would best support a transgender, gender diverse, and intersex inmates' health and safety, and whether the placement would pose risks to safety or security. I'm realizing I already read this for you. Originally, what followed here was the rebuttable presumption, but based on testimony and discussion yesterday, that was not the clearest or most useful way to articulate the decision-making. So on page 8, we have two pieces of language that we could consider that try to explain how the department should be making this determination. So on page 8, line 6, the department shall give serious consideration to the inmate's classification or housing placement request. If the department finds that accommodating the inmate's request would pose an unreasonable risk to safety or security, the department may decide that it cannot accommodate the request. So that's still a way to capture kind of the two parts we had in the rebuttable presumption, but without that framework. So that's option 1. The second option was based on a suggestion from commissioner testimony that effectively the statute would describe the kinds of things that the department should consider. So this is line 12. In making classification and housing placement determinations, the department shall consider A, the inmate's request as to housing placement, B, the inmate's health and safety, C, the safety and security of other inmates, and that should say staff. That's on me. And D, facility operations. So I think you'd have to hear from DOC if they felt that either version of this language would result in something different in practice, but they are two different ways to describe, to like tell DOC what kinds of things it should be thinking about and how it should be considering them. I think the first one uses serious consideration language that is used elsewhere in the bill. I think that is potentially a little bit stronger language than the second version of the language in terms of how it refers to the weight the department is giving to the inmate's request. The second version, the department is weighing all 4 of those things equally as written. Those are the things it's considering, it's weighing them equally. And in the first version, the department is giving serious consideration. So as written, I think more weight to the request by the inmate, but also considering all factors. Any questions about the two versions of the language? I also think I answered my question that I am curious if the department thinks it would do something different based on these two things, but I think as I was explaining it, there would be more weight to the inmate's request in the first version than as written in the second.
Could we combine both of them? Because what I'm wondering, we're gonna have to make a policy decision here, folks, one or the other, or a combination. What I like about 2 is it sort of lays out what the department would consider, but it might be too limiting in what they consider. I don't know. They have, it's an and, it's not an or. So they have to consider all A, B, C, and D. Folks pick that up. It says and at the end of line 16, which means DOC needs to consider A, B, C, and D, not one or the other. It was something different. So they have to consider all 4 factors. So you list something, which makes it really clear what they need to look at. But on the other hand, it does, when you list something, you tend to limit.
That's what I like about the first one, actually, like what Hillary is saying. I think that then, and it's stronger because it's written in a way that lets them incorporate more things into the decision.
So the department needs to give serious consideration to the inmate's classification or housing placement request. And if that request poses an unreasonable risk to safety and security, may decide cannot accommodate it. So it's only on risk to safety and security to the facility or to the inmates.
The specific call out in the bottom section about the safety of other inmates. Because that is implied in the first section, but not said. The specific call out of it in the second section of the safety of inmate staff makes sense.
And that could be incorporated in the first.
Actually,
So there,
could, it
there are
could.
ways.
It's gotta blend
Mix
both
and
of
match.
these. I
Okay.
think you really have to blend both. That's just my
I like the
personal
the
thinking.
cleanness of the first one, but yes, I would agree with having that prescription.
So other inmates and staff is safety and security of other inmates and staff specifically is something we can pull into the first version. Is there anything else about this? The first version doesn't mention facility operations.
Yeah, I'm worried.
That was something
concerned
the
about
commissioner
that one.
mentioned. So is that also something that the committee would like to pull into the first version?
So facility operations, when we were in COVID, you went lockdown. The other piece that I'm wondering plays in, you're short in staff, you may lock down a unit. That's a facility operation. What other facility operations? You could be doing construction and you have to move a wing now. I'm just thinking, maybe I'm thinking out of the box, Josh, but
Yeah, no, I know. I'm trying to think how that plays out in practice, and in particular around decisions for housing for,
overcrowding?
well, no, but that wouldn't be a reason to not place somebody in a facility when they belong there. I wouldn't keep a cisgender female in Springfield because Chittenden's crowded. That's not an option. And if we decide that that is the most appropriate place for a gender diverse or transgender person, I don't think I can use the fact that Chittenden's crowded as a reason not to do that. I think there are facility operation pieces that definitely come into play.
So one thing to think about is that if we take the other inmates and staff language from the second version, included in the first version, if it's just the first version, that doesn't limit the factors DOC can consider in making the overall placement decision. It's just saying that if DOC is going to not accommodate an inmate's request, the reasons it can do that are because it found there was an unreasonable risk to safety or security to other inmates and staff, or of other inmates and staff. So it's really just describing the circumstances under which the department can not accommodate an inmate's request. It's not restricting DOC's decision-making and what kind of factors it can consider generally. So I think the bill originally was trying to get at what the first is saying, like, what does it mean to ask the department to consider an inmate's request? The second version was just coming out of testimony yesterday as another way to describe what the bill wants DOC to do in terms of decision-making, how it wants DOC to make the decision.
So in one, the department needs to give serious consideration to the inmate's request. Okay. The department then needs to find that accommodating that request would pose an unreasonable risk to the inmate's health and safety and to the safety and security of other inmates and staff.
Please, or.
Yeah,
Or.
yeah.
So you're merging B and C into one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I like that.
And the department can then decide it cannot accommodate. So it really limits the department to deny that accommodation based on the inmate's health and safety and the safety and safety and security of other inmates and staff. Doesn't give you any other factors
Say no.
to say no, doesn't it? Doesn't give you any other factors to say no.
I think the question would be, are there times where DOC has other reasons to not accommodate a request? In which case,
Would it be facility operations at all? I don't know. I just don't want to tie your hands behind your back and all of a sudden you get a
I appreciate
situation.
that. I definitely appreciate that. I mean, those safety and security risks,
That's pretty broad.
that's pretty broad, and those are really the factors when we're having these conversations, like, is it gonna be safe for the person, is it gonna be safe for the other people?
So
Those really are
we
the,
keep the general risk to safety and security.
yeah,
Then we also add inmates' health and security. And the safety and security of other inmates and staff.
that, I think that.
And wars between three different.
I think that gives us enough leeway to make appropriate decisions. While still giving serious consideration to the inmate request reviews.
So safety or security that's there now would cover facility operations. So it keeps too many notes going back and forth between people. Makes me nervous.
No, no. No.
Does that make sense to the committee?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I like the combo better.
Yeah.
What the combo?
Human meals especially.
Yeah.
A little bit of one, a little bit of two.
Okay, let's quickly go because
Um,
that was due in here at some point to talk about new language for recidivism.
Perfect. So moving forward, the next draft will reflect the combo platter for subsection D.
What did I miss?
On page 8, line 18, subdivision 2, the department shall base its classification and housing placement determinations on reliable, objective evidence. The department's determination regarding accommodating an inmate's classification or housing placement request shall not be based on assumptions or stereotypes about the risks at a particular correctional facility. So the bill, as introduced, had language about a factor at the facility. And I think this language was the suggestion to try to make that clear, capture the idea, like this is what that factor language was getting at. But this is trying to state it in a way that could be more easily understood.
And that was a DOC request, I believe, wasn't it?
I think there were some general questions about the factor language.
This is handled.
But I was gonna say, and echoing the commissioner who was here yesterday for searches, you essentially laid out that broad expectation in that one paragraph and then left the rest of it. Would that be an appropriate approach here for classification as well? The broad expectation of the committee or of the legislature is that DOC shall give serious consideration, blah, 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 but then leave the rest of that for policy. Very similar to what you did with searches.
So the suggestion would be from subdivision 2 on.
Question for the committee, obviously, but how much and what of that language do you need beyond what is in the first section? And then you'd have sort of parity with the direction you've given us on searches.
So subsection E, just to hit the points that are in these other sections for the committee to discuss what it feels important to include or not. On page 9, subsection E is about the department providing a reason in writing why the department cannot accommodate a request. Subsection F is about placement out of state, and that essentially the department shall consider these same, perform the same decision-making process as it would for in-state and coordinate with any contracted facility. G is about reassessment. So the department would reassess housing placement in certain circumstances. Subsection H is PREA as a PREA standard. There was some earlier DOC testimony about making sure that these sections were consistent with PREA. So H is a PREA standard, but now that there is a PREA section in the bill, will be touched on elsewhere, but that is H. And I. So I think an I is something from the original bill that when the department is making bed assignment, placement, or programming decisions, it give serious consideration of inmates' perception of health and safety, including some specific options. So in terms of Josh's question, up to the committee to decide whether it feels it's important to include all of these details or not. from my perspective, I will just flag that, the pieces that are potentially, already covered in DOC policy or more policy oriented are subsection E, subsection G.
Bring the paper up.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry.
The audience.
Doing my. So this would be subsection, I guess subsection E is not in policy, so I'll leave that alone for now. Subsection G would be already covered in DOC policy and is more a procedural thing. H similarly is something already covered in PREA and DOC policy. I is something from the original bill that I don't think is specifically reflected in DOC policy. So certainly up to the committee, whether to keep all of these or just to keep some of these. But to start off, I will just flag that I think at least G and H are reflected in policy as kind of more procedural or smaller things. So in terms of consistency with the search approach, maybe those don't need to stay in statute. E, F, and I are potentially new statements or kind of broader statements to include. Or not, again, the committee could choose to say that the sections, the subsections earlier cover the principle and that none of these are needed,
We have a
or
question.
that some are needed.
So the first one too.
Which first one are you?
Yeah.
The first one,
Okay, on
and I'm
page
back
8.
on page 8 that we're talking about in this, right? Line 18, page 2, I can't imagine how you even enforce that. It seems so silly. That you're asking people, it shall not be based on assumptions or stereotypes. Tell me how you're gonna do that. How are you gonna enforce that? These guys, we're asking them to put these people in the right place. Of course, they're gonna make assumptions. And there's a little, I mean, I don't know. Anyway, I have a problem with that one. I would kill that
It's very
altogether.
subjective.
It's super subjective and it's like, and how do you even begin to enforce that? So I have a problem.
So I want to talk about how we got there
Yeah.
for this one. So this is a person identifies, and I remember us talking about this, Josh, so
Yeah, we
weigh
did.
in. This one really came up in the reverse, right? So a woman identifies as a trans man. I no longer want to be placed at CRCF, I want to be placed at, let's say, Northwest. And the department says, whoa, 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 we don't think Northwest is a safe place for you. And that's based on assumptions and stereotypes. So the fact that we're about to place you into an all men's facility and you identify as a trans man, but biologically. Right, this intends to protect those assumptions and stereotypes from weighing too heavily on the decision to accommodate, in this case, in this example, a trans man's request. Josh spent a lot of time with us talking about sort of the iterative process in and around that. And it falls back on the individualized, which is still in here, situational basis of, and how they get there. And I want you to weigh in because I don't know if I'm.
Yeah, well,
I don't want to.
I get what you're saying, but I don't think that's in here.
I don't know how much of that is covered in sort of the language we worked on one. Assumptions and judgment, I think is a fuzzy one. If we're talking about assessing the risk to somebody's safety there, I can't make an assumption that because I'm putting somebody in a male facility, they're going to be raped. On the other hand, I am putting them in a facility with males to include folks who are convicted rapists. So there is certainly beyond just an assumption about assessing that danger. And I'm not sure, to your point, how I draw that line and to what extent that's already covered in the factors that we're considering in discussing number one.
Right. I'm not opposed to helping you try to make that, but I'm assuming, and maybe I shouldn't be doing that, that you are trying to put someone in the safest situation they can be in. So I just feel like this is like, I just feel this is gray. That's all. It's just not as clear as it needs to be. That's to me.
Right?
And I am confident, and I want to reiterate the gratitude I have for both Josh and Jen who were part of this process. And I am confident that Vermont is well ahead of the curve on this. That being stated, we are here, and I know that the department is in the process, for example, of creating a search policy. Great. And we've deferred to that, right? We've accommodated that. We are here because of testimony that indicates practice has not kept up with intent. That is what we have heard. So I'm not necessarily, I'm cautious. I'm really cautious, if not resistant, to deferring to pending policy in this section around housing. I'm not negating the conversation we still need to have on point two, especially if it's unclear. But I don't necessarily want to defer to pending policy on this one.
I just would hope there's a stronger way to say that, that's all, in a way that you know, I probably, because I'm a little dopey, I can't come up with that, but I know that.
And one might cover it.
Right. You know.
And
I
then,
think one is kind of the affirmative version of it, right? Like one is describing affirmatively, here's how the department shall make the decision. If the department is following what we have described in one,
Why is that there?
I mean, you can still have value in a specific prohibition, but I think that's something for the committee to weigh, that if there is this pretty specific direction about how the decision shall be made, how much work is the specific prohibition in subdivision 2 doing? And I think folks have explained the kind of scenario it is intended to apply to.
so can I kick back to page 7C? Because this may clarify this. Lines 14 says there'll be a review by a multidisciplinary review.
Right.
That's for the classification and housing. So who is on this multidisciplinary review panel? Number one.
Yep.
And is it currently in place? Because we have listed out here who should be on the panel. And is that currently in place? And they're the ones that really determine where a person is housed. So is that multidisciplinary review panel already in place?
There's in fact two. There's an initial review by the local team that includes the facility management, operations, casework, as well as mental health and medical. And then they make a recommendation that goes to the central team, which also includes our health and wellness, our health, wellness and engagement division, both medical and mental health, as well as PREA, operations and classification. And then we review the local determination and make a decision. I would want to look specifically sort of once the language is finalized around whether we need to provide additional training to those folks or bring anybody else onto those committees to make sure that we're meeting what's in here. But both those groups exist and function, and are the ones who make those decisions.
So the language on page 7, right, for C, line 12 through 18, looks like we're creating a new panel, or are we not? Because it's saying the review panel shall be composed of individuals, including medical, mental health, with experience in gender dysphoria and gender affirming care, and personnel who have received training. So are we setting up in this C a new review panel, or does that reflect your current panel?
I hope that is not the intent of C.
That's why I'm asking.
And even though you guys don't specify people with operational experience, we're going to add that to the panel. We're not required to, but I can't imagine us not wanting that there. you're saying specifically that you want the medical and mental health perspectives and that those folks be knowledgeable about gender affirming care, which makes sense. You don't have to tell DOC to include operational people in operational decisions. You can, but we're gonna,
So if you have a couple layers of panels, do you really need, at the bottom of page 8, do you really need 2?
We talked about this too, that those panels are already doing what
we met
yeah,
this morning,
yeah,
to review 2 cases.
yeah, okay.
So Sean and then Jane.
Well, Troy, what I'm getting at is, can we say on 18, just the first sentence? Can we just say the department shall base its classifications and housing placement determinations on reliable, objective evidence? Done. How's that?
Yeah.
And then not have that, because then the next line muddies it again, you know?
And I think to the chair's point, I think section C from page 7 is in place to create those reliable, objective, evidence-based decisions.
James?
Well, that took one of my things away. So, and I agree with that. The second one is if, Josh is concerned about whether or not we're making a new panel or if we're somehow going to make sure the wording is acknowledges that they have panels. And that, without creating something else, but if their panel exists and it follows this, then we're not really making a new one. We're just codifying that they have.
But are they term multidisciplinary?
Oh, yes.
panels? They
Yes,
are.
we absolutely use that term.
So the only thing that would be added. Are we adding anything? Because I'm not looking at the operational piece. Are we adding anything?
So for C, the way it's drafted, it doesn't say shall create or is created. But one way to clarify that the intention is to have the statute require that the department keep using the department's panels that it has is page 7, lines 12 through 13. The department shall make classification and housing placement determinations for transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmates based on review by the department's multidisciplinary review panels.
Those panels.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we would make it panels.
Yes,
Already
there are 2.
But it clarifies.
And then the multidisciplinary review panels shall be composed of individuals, including, that means that it's not limited. It doesn't have to be just these people. That language is set up to be,
Yeah, the wording.
including does a lot of work there. That the panels have to have that representation, but could be composed of other individuals as well.
So Josh,
Could potentially also just say the panel shall include individuals. With blah, 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 blah.
I think that shall be composed of it.
That's fine. I don't-
That is more straightforward, but it gives me a little challenge with
Okay,
nouns following.
that's fine.
So
I
Josh,
don't want to mess up your nouns.
we're putting in review by the department's multidisciplinary review panel. You have one panel?
Panels.
We have,
Panels.
Made it,
You made it plural? Okay, that's what I wanted. I missed that.
I asked that question a minute ago.
Yes, when we were
we want the
drafting.
local folks to look at it and then we
Yeah.
want a central level review.
Yeah, when we were drafting, we knew that there were 2 panels. I think this helps clarify that the composition requirement applies to both.
Yep.
The way that subsection D is drafted, when it returns to the department, was drafted like that to make sure that at both levels, both panels were using this criteria and making the decision in this same way. So that's why subsection D and subsection E, and in fact, the rest of this section, uses the department, such that it's applying to both of the panels' decision-making. So I guess one question first on C, any other edits? C, or questions folks had about C?
Looks good.
All right. And I heard the edit from the committee that on page 8, line 19, starting with the department's determination regarding, the next draft would take out that at that sentence. So that brings us to, we have 5 subsections in this classification and housing section. We can keep walking through each of them. There was testimony about whether all of them are warranted. We're kind of questioning whether all of them are warranted in light of the search policy approach. And I think also some discussion of there being a reason to treat these two things differently. So I will just keep marching through subsection.
Yeah, so you're talking page 9,
Yes, we are on page 9.
section E, F, G, H, and I. So what I picked up previously, G is in current DOC policy.
Oh, really?
I picked that up. H
Not
is,
necessarily verbatim, but this is drawn from and input was provided consistent with.
H is part of a PREA standard.
Oh.
And I was in our original bill.
Correct. Yep.
And E and F came from where?
E is also from the original bill as
Original.
introduced. F was added in subcommittee discussions because there was a question about when you read this whole section, it's not clear whether it covers individuals who are placed out of state. So F was a specific addition to confirm that the kinds of things the bill is directing DOC to consider in making these determinations apply to determinations in placing folks in facilities in Vermont and in determining whether an out-of-state placement is appropriate.
So for E, it's explaining back to the inmate why they were denied. And then that goes into inmate records.
Yes.
Say more about that. Right?
Yeah, say more
that's
about
a
that.
industry.
Because that was like, yeah, there was a lot to that. That was just the tip of the iceberg.
You were around, Mary. Inmate records in terms of when inmates have access to their records.
Oh, we were supposed to talk about that.
Yeah, we did that. We did a lot of work on that one in 17, 18, and the department didn't want to do it. You didn't want to do it. You had your legal person in here at the time fighting us, and then we wanted to do rules. and
Explaining to the
We
table.
we did end up doing a rule.
Finally, after we came back and told you we meant it. And then you finally did it. 3 years worth it took us.
So are we saying
So-
E and F are good then?
Well, the question is, do we want clarity? Do we want the department to, in writing, be very clear with the person who's being denied?
Sure.
Why they were unable to accommodate the inmate's classification or housing placement request?
Do they do that now, Josh?
The policy that goes into effect on Friday requires give them a copy of it. We do currently make a written determination. That has not always consistently gone back to the incarcerated individual, but we've added that as a specific requirement policy that's going into effect on Friday. It's already been signed.
So that will go forward.
Yes. I don't know that we use specific and articulable reason in our policy.
That was language from the bill as introduced. I would say that from I'm not sure including both of them changes the requirement from saying specific. The idea is you can't have a one sentence vague, we decided it because safety. I think it's like,
Right.
that would not be permissible. Whether or not this line said specific and articulable or just specific. But I think that's getting at, there has to be a non-generic reason. I'm not saying the bill should say that, but
So even though they may have the policy, I just kind of knowing how corrections can work with the public and with inmates, what they say to family members on the outside or legislators on the outside. This language would really clear up any ambiguity that we might hear from one side or the other.
There's a benefit sometimes to having us put something, having a defined something in writing, because then when someone says it's, well, they did this and I have no idea why. Or we have something and we're welcome to, with a release, we can share that information with folks, or you were given a copy and I would like to see that copy if you're telling me DOC was inappropriate here. I don't have any.
That's both sides.
Yeah, I don't have, which is why we put in the policy that we were going to notify them anyway. The question is solely whether or not it also needs to be in statute. I believe there's a bunch of legislators in the room, so I will leave that in your capable hands.
That was well done.
So upon determining that it will not accommodate the request, document and certify in writing. Instead of saying a specific articulable reason
Articulable.
or whatever. Right, just saying the reason, certify in writing, the reason the department is unable. Do you have to do the specific reason?
So I'll just offer something about, we have document through reason, document and certify in writing a specific and articulable reason. There is some work being done by specific or articulable. If you just say reason, then it could be the generic reason of because safety, one sentence. So there is some work being done as a matter of language by saying at least specific or articulable. Something, some adjective for reason is doing some work. For document and certify in writing, I think that is 3 ways of saying document or in write. I think
In writing.
I mean, sometimes you bang things over the head in statutory language for good reason. I think that I understand the key force here to be, it needs to be in writing, which is important. I think
Document and certify.
Or just kill and certify.
I think and certified. I think document in writing a specific reason the
Okay.
department
Got it.
would
Thank you.
capture the substance there, and
Gotcha.
Sold us.
the goal is like elegant, only what you need. I will get there in 10 years. You are here for the ride while I figure it out. But at least for this particular section, I think that is a straightforward way to capture the intent there.
Get rid of and certify, get rid of and articulable.
Yep.
Articulable.
So what would it read? Upon
So-
determining that it will not accommodate the request.
Document in writing a specific reason the department is unable to accommodate the inmate's classification or housing placement request.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, trouble.
no, so I'm just wondering, practically, how does that work? So like, I'm seeing a form, reason for denial, and in one scene, I see like a bunch of check boxes, right? Like safety and security, check. Is that sufficient or is that
A
specific enough?
little more credit than that.
No, but would it be like Crazy Eddie on this unit said he's gonna beat up like any transgender person who comes?
No, that would be a reason to move Crazy Eddie.
Good.
Based on an assessment of your criminal history of violence against women, and substantiated case of sexual harassment during prior incarceration, for instance.
All right.
I think specific requires more than a checkbox.
I'm good.
Okay, let's move along. here. I
That's
wanna
not
get through this.
that's not an assumption or a stereotype.
You just picture one of those while you were on ads and they just.
I'm semi-ambivalent to this, but there is a difference between documenting and certifying. One is just saying something happened, one is saying it's true. They are different things.
I think if the intent is requiring, so you could have and Josh, feel free to hop in here. You could have you either have a DOC memo form. Certify would be saying like you need to like swear an affidavit about what happened, which it doesn't seem to me this is a decision. It's not like a quasi-judicial review. We certify that this happened. We're making like findings, or we were there and we're saying we saw this happen. It's a way of capturing how the panel or panels made the decision, which I'm not sure what it would look like to certify that decision as opposed to document. So fair point that there's a difference, but
I'm not
here,
advocating for keeping it. I just
Yeah.
want the people, I guess, happen that they're here. Is that there is in fact a difference. If anybody didn't understand that there is a difference between the two.
In statutory language, generally, you're absolutely right. I think here, the suggestion is that there's no work being done but great clarification.
We do make a lot of really, impactful decisions on people that we document, but not necessarily have an obligation to certify.
A great general point about language, that in other bills where you see document or certify, that will make a difference.
The let thing every day, so I know.
No.
I gotta understand it.
It's great.
Coming to you guys. It's working.
Moving forward to subsection F, so this is page 9, line 8. The department shall consider on an individualized basis whether placement at a contracted facility, including outside the state, would best support a transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmate's health and safety, and whether the placement would pose risks to safety or security. So that's the same language that we have earlier in the bill that applies to facilities here. And it's saying placement at a contracted facility, including outside the state, which I understand to be placement at a contracted facility outside the state, but that is a way of just covering bases.
Can I stop you there? Placement at a contracted facility, including outside the state. So are there any contracted facilities in the state that a person could go to?
Not,
Because we're talking inmates. We're not talking offenders. We're
yeah,
talking
not in terms of secure settings, other than, actually Red Clover would be. That's a contracted facility.
with DOC.
It's DCF, but we do place DOC juveniles who have been placed in our care, may be placed at Red Clover through an agreement that we had with DCF where that's appropriate. So that would be a contracted in-state facility. And if we had a 17-year-old that was transgender, then this would require that we assess whether or not that's appropriate and coordinate with that contracted facility. I will say, I think A might require us to do it anyway. So I don't have an objection to F. I think A makes us do it anyway, but again, that really leaves to you guys
More clear.
whether or not that you want that additional level of clarity. But I don't have an objection to F.
So the other piece that I'm contracted facility, including out of state. That is more than contract with Core Civic. Is that our interstate compact as well?
I would believe it to include interstate compact, yes.
And is that our intent? And what determines a person going through the interstate compact? And do we have much latitude or flexibility?
We have latitude, and we don't use our interstate compact and intergovernmental agreement with the feds. We don't use those a lot, but it is usually related to somebody who either due to behavior is really unsafe in our system, or is, if the chair were to get arrested, you've worked in corrections related issues for 100 years. We might determine that it was not 100. I exaggerate slightly.
Close.
We might determine that it wasn't appropriate to house you in Chittenden because of your extended familiarity with the system. If I were to get arrested, I'm quite sure they would not want to incarcerate me in Vermont.
Right.
So those sorts of circumstances, we don't use it for egregious crimes as much as we used to, but that would be an option.
Right.
If Colorado had a case where their corrections chief of security was shot by a recently released incarcerated individual, that's somebody that we might not want to continue to house in the Vermont system if something like that, God forbid, were to happen here. So those sorts of circumstances. But if that person happened to be transgender or gender diverse, then we'd be required to make sure that wherever we're putting them is appropriate and looks at that factor.
And this paragraph gives you that flexibility, but also gives you that support.
We have to consider it, but again, anytime we're looking at this, we're already looking at some risk to safety and security given the person. So how does one weigh the other? It hasn't been an option to this point, but if somebody had a really great program that was working really well for gender diverse folks in the system somewhere, and we're willing to take folks, and we have somebody who wanted to go there, we could certainly examine that under this, with or without this, we could examine that.
One option, given some of the conversation around exactly what this would cover, separate from what comes before. One option for line 9 is to say whether placement at a facility outside the state would best support a transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmates. Because at this point, it's clear that contracted facility inside the state is covered elsewhere. And to be clear about contract versus compact, placement at a facility outside the state.
That's good.
Does that work, Josh? Okay.
Very good.
First time I have heard that today. I'm delighted.
I've done that today, though.
Cover is good.
It's better than dopey.
I think we need,
I usually avoid either of them, so I just wanna,
I
take
think
the
we
clever.
need a new framed glove.
Was it Seven Dwarfs? We had Sleepy, we had Dopey, we had,
Got sleepy.
yeah, we got Sleepy and Dopey. Can't remember the others.
Well, Chair, I think the capital bill dollars were just resting in your account, right? It's, hopefully, hopefully we don't see those charges.
No, no.
With an eye on time, I want to keep moving just to make sure that
Going
we
here.
can cover at least the rest of this section. So subsection G, this is page 9, line 14. This is something that is, if not, it's not verbatim taken from current policy, but it is certainly consistent with taken from generally DOC policy. The department shall reassess an inmate's housing and placement at any time if the inmate requests a reassessment or raises concerns about the inmate's health or safety. Or 2, the inmate engages in misconduct, including conduct that poses a safety risk to the inmate or to other inmates.
I don't think it hurts to have it in this. I think it's good. If we want it to be.
Because there will be reassessments at times, and you need some clarity. Okay, let's keep going. The next one's in PREA, that's the standards.
Subsection H, so page 10, line 1, the department shall not place a transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmate in segregation housing solely based on the inmate's gender identity or status.
So with it already being in PREA, is this needed or is it suspenders?
I think you already have language restricting or specifying when the department can use segregation housing as well. So
Yes,
I think we're already prohibited, but again, up to the committee whether you want extra belts and suspenders on that.
right. Yeah, we're very clear on SEG, what it can be used for.
Yes, you are.
We're very clear on that.
The bill itself also, I think, the bill has the PREA standards in them now as well, or has the PREA language. So I think there's another
We can,
part of the bill where this.
we can delete this section. Folks.
Committee is not.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So I was in the original bill.
Yes, so this is it's consistent with, but slightly different than the grounds covered before for individualized basis and the kinds of decisions. So this is bed assignment, placement, or programming decisions. So a little bit more granular than classification and housing. Same overall criteria. So this first part 1 is consistent with what we said before about classification and housing, or the bill says before. The department shall consider on an individualized basis whether a bed assignment, placement, or programming decision would best support a transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmate's health and safety, and whether the bed assignment, placement, or programming decision would pose risks to safety or security. This next bit 2, the department shall give the inmate's perception of health and safety serious consideration in making bed assignment, placement, and programming decisions, including A, housing the inmate with another inmate to best support safety and security, and B, if there is an articulable risk to the inmate, removing the risk where possible or otherwise alleviating the risk.
That's an and, not an or.
Yep. Because it including means in making any of these decisions, the department shall consider these options. It won't necessarily be choosing or implementing both of these options. They will both be there. So
So,
it's kind of a more granular, but still placement related part that was in the bill as introduced.
so the department needs to give the inmate's perception of health and safety serious consideration. So the inmate perceives that they are at risk, health-wise or safety risk. And the department needs to take that into consideration when they're making a bed assignment, placement, and program decisions. So what is the difference between bed assignment and placement? Josh? Lincoln?
I was hoping you would tell me. I mean, what facility they're at, what unit they're at, things like that. I'm more worried about I-1, which seems like this weird Venn diagram with all that language we worked on above. Whereas 2 adds more specificity, that's a little bit different.
In that, in 1, placement is kind of the overlap. That makes sense.
And the standard is just a little bit different. If there's a language, it's slightly different.
Seems like that's all covered elsewhere. Am I?
Well, 2B is very specific to, this is the Crazy Eddie scenario, right? 2B is saying we're gonna get rid of Crazy Eddie. We're not gonna place you somewhere else because Crazy Eddie lives there.
Removing the risk.
Yeah.
So one option is
Oh, Tom,
keeping,
go crazy.
one option in like
That's-
keeping the substance and removing the overlap potentially. If subsection I doesn't have subsection 1, it just has subsection 2, like that would be subsection I, or sorry, subdivision 2. So subsection I would say the department shall give the inmate's perception of health and safety serious consideration in making, I guess let's leave housing placement in there for now, but in making bed assignment, housing placement, and programming decisions, including housing the inmate with another inmate to best support safety and security, and B, if there is an articulable risk to the inmate, removing the risk where possible or otherwise alleviating the
Right,
risk.
and another thing that came up with A is this person gets me, I get along with this person is a safe person, an ally. That's why A is in there.
Right. I just think I-1 just got covered by putting housing in front of, placement on 2, right? Isn't that what you're doing? Or you
Well,
can't?
I think it's that 2 is the real meat of it, right? Like 2 is the
Right.
specific thing we're trying to add. I think.
What do we do with 1?
Get rid of it.
You need
Right, that's what I
the specific language though that we're talking about transgender, gender diverse and intersex people in this.
We can carry that into.
Yeah,
it.
you need to
that's what you're merging.
Yes,
So-
merging
Okay,
it.
yeah.
No, great point.
Combo platter number 2.
So
Great.
how would the 2, who would now be the new 1, how would that read?
It would just be I, because now there are not 2 subdivisions.
Yeah,
It would say the department shall give a transgender, gender diverse, or intersex inmates perception of health and safety, serious consideration in making bed assignment, housing placement, and programming decisions, including A, and then A and B would read as they are.
yeah.
Is it A and B or 1 and 2 now?
Thank you. It would be 1 and 2.
1 and 2.
Yeah.
Story. Because I picked that up.
Change that tomorrow.
Just get when you've been here all these years, like Hedrick's been here. So.
Well, you'll get better. Every year you folks will get better. It'll be scary. Yeah.
So 323, the sections that remain, just to give us a little roadmap. The PREA section should be very quick to run through because it is the changes discussed this morning. So I will just quickly say that if you look at page 10, line 19, line 18, this removes the conditional finance language. I'm forgetting exactly the words
Yep.
that were in it previously, but it just says not subject to available appropriation, but the Department of Corrections shall adopt and comply.
Yes.
Main change. It puts back in the 44 standards or 44
Yep.
references to the standards.
We agreed to that this morning.
Yes.
To put in statute.
I heard.
On
You were
page,
watching, oh, you were here.
No, I was not here. It was one of the things, but I had heard.
on page 13, line 11, this date is highlighted because I think we're hoping that DOC will indicate the date when they submit the federal report so that this matches up. So highlighted for now.
When do you submit that federal report?
I do not know. I can find out, but I do not know.
Just curious, do you do it at the end of the year? Do you do it
My guess is it probably aligns with the federal fiscal year, which ends
October?
October, the end of September.
That feels right, but I'm gonna text Jen.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, that would make sense. Most reporting requirements of the Fed line up with their fiscal year.
Yeah.
So of course doesn't line up with anything else.
And she's not watching.
Contact a friend.
So answer pending on the date. The other new addition here, and this is, I think, subject to DOC feedback or any other preferred language, but on line 13, I understood the committee discussing this morning that you wanted some more language about what is in the report to identify that it is whatever you give to the feds, put in the report that comes to us.
Right.
So for now, on lines 13 through 16, it is Commissioner of Corrections shall submit a report to the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions and the Senate Committee on Institutions that provides the same information that the department reports to federal authorities pursuant to the Prison Rape Elimination Act, 34 USC, all those sections.
So we were more specific in other drafts. We're saying for now, just do what you're doing for Priya. And there is,
Appreciate.
yeah, and then there's language that we're gonna review this.
Correct. So one other change that was made after testimony yesterday was on line 18. This is page 13, line 18, adopt policies, not rules. But then, yes, the other review built in, if we scroll down to, this is page 15, lines 14 through 19.
And what page are you on?
This is page 15.
15, okay, yep.
Highlight. So this adds in session law, section 11, prison rape elimination standards and reporting. On or before December 17th, 2028, the Department of Corrections shall submit a report to the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions and the Senate Committee on Institutions. The report shall identify any changes to the standards or reporting requirements under the Prison Rape Elimination Act as may be amended. So this, I understood the committee wanted 2 years. I'm pretty sure I intended to write December 15th and not 17th, which looks odd to me in this moment. But anyway, the December 8th,
January.
maybe, there should be 2027. The one suggestion to say December instead of January is that it would clearly fall before a bill request date for a long form. You could always do it short form, but that's just right one option. The idea is this might generate a suggestion for legislation. But I think that could be December 15th, 2027.
So it's not a sunset.
So a sunset would suggest that the committee doesn't intend for anything to go forward after that date, that there's kind of a revisiting whether this should be there at all. And I understood the committee to want looking at whether there should be updates, and maybe there won't be updates warranted, in which case a sunset didn't feel quite right, but that is the alternative. A sunset is another way to indicate, hey, future legislature, you need to come back and look at this. We could do a sunset in combination with something else, but this is a way for DOC to flag, hey, look, our PREA requirements changed. We're now reporting different information to the feds. This would be challenging. You know, maybe this means you want to change what you ask for from us or not. It's still a way to trigger a review.
I would prefer not to have the sunset because I don't think in my 30 years here, we've ever seen a sunset go by. So it's, this review is good. And then we can go for it, the others we can go for it.
So I hate to do this, but
We're going to.
I'm going to, because I'm looking at this. So on page 13, bottom of 13, we have section 7, law enforcement powers of correctional officers. What are we doing there?
So very quickly, don't be scared by these sections.
Right.
These are sections more for me than for anyone else. Because we are changing the definitions in Title 28, including some of the numbering of existing definitions. These
Okay.
3 sections are making sure that where in other parts of Title 28, we are cross-referencing the exact number of a definition, that is correct. So that's what I flagged yesterday of if the definitions are going to look like what they look like, there are a couple changes to other sections in statute that cross-reference them that we have to update to be accurate. So on page 13, section 7, the key tiny change is on page 14, line 3, where it's referring to the existing definition of correctional officer, but with the added definitions from the bill, that will in fact be at subdivision 315 and not 310. So it makes that one small change. Similarly in section 8, so scrolling to page 14, this is lines 18 and 19. Supervising officer is now subdivision 314 and correctional officer is now subdivision 315 because of the way the definitions are reordered. We try to keep the definitions in definition sections somewhat alphabetical, which is why there is that reordering. Finally, section 9 is that same issue, and a reminder that there are other provisions that have to do with segregation of inmates. But page 15, line 5, segregation is now defined at subdivision 317. So those are those 3 sections. They are just conforming sections to keep the statutes correct. They are non-substantive, but if the definition section is going to stay as is, then we should make these as well. And that, in fact, is the entire draft. We're now at page 15, section 12, effective date. This act shall take effect on July 1st, 2026. So I have direction from the committee on a next draft, which I can prepare. I may not be in the room, but I will follow testimony on the medical care section tomorrow morning. And will await the committee's direction on how the committee wants to proceed on that section.
So we confirmed Dr. Euliger tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Yeah.
And then what were we gonna do at 10 o'clock? That was it's a telecom with a potential vote. And then I know I talked to Matt Valerio. I don't know if he's available even for 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. I just want the Prisoners' Rights Office to weigh in terms of what they're seeing in their world. Folks, maybe housing issues based on their gender identification, if they're coming in with anything on that. And also if they're seeing anything with Priya.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything from him since.
So it would be Matt coming in. He's going to check with some of his folks. So if you could check with Matt and says, follow up to the conversation you had with the chair today. Is there a time tomorrow that he could zoom in or just give us 10 or 15 minutes worth?
Okay.
That's all we really need, because he says, yeah, they get a lot and they work it through.
I think we need to give Hillary a round of applause.
Hillary, you did a great job. Thank you. So we're gonna get a new draft tomorrow. Mary suggested folks bring home the bill, at least I know we made some changes, but at least read what we got so you get that under your belt. Because if you don't do it now, we're gonna do it tomorrow. And it's gonna be an hour and a half worth of reading quietly. Or an hour at least. Because we need to be very clear what this bill says.
Every word makes.
Every word makes a difference. We, as members, need to understand this to help Gina on the floor, because I'm sure there's going to be quite a few questions. And we need to be very clear in our answers. So Ways and Means today took up the driver license Any word they voted out?
Yes, they found it favorable de minimis. And it's gonna be on the notice calendar tomorrow.
Up on Friday. Do you know who's reporting it for them?
Betty,
Okay.
Teddy gets us.
How's your report going?
doesn't exist, but it will tomorrow morning.
It better.
And I'll have notes to you.
Oh, it will.
For
Oh,
reference.
no.
Okay, so I'll help you with, I'll read it over. I'll help you with it. Okay.
It'll be memorable.
Of this one.
That's very bad.
See, it's up in the whole committee. Chamber.
And then the parole board bill, is that still on approach, do you know? Well,
Say that again.
is the parole board bill still on approach, do you know?
Yes, they did not take a vote as of yesterday. They've done some.
Joe, we're looking
today. I would not be aware.
That's a minor, right? That's a minor.
So,
My understanding is that they might be waiting from either a recommendation from this committee about where the money is coming from or not.
I haven't heard that.
Okay,
Yeah, but
I don't want to let it get lost in the
I
shuffle.
know, but I haven't heard that. So somebody's got to reach out. I know Trevor's worked it through and he was clear where the money was coming from.
we
I
also.
think it could be worth clarifying whether they are waiting to take a vote upon
Maybe
further
clearly
communication from you.
from the rest of the committee.
On the pro board.
What time, Dave?
9:45. Tomorrow?
That's the approach.
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe that's their clarity that they're,
Yes.
great, maybe that's their clarity that they
So
were.
there, what they have is just a committee vote on that?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
I will go down with them all.
Okay. So I think we're done for today.
Okay.
And we missed Michelle talking about recidivism. I want to get her in. Yeah, because they're working on that.
Yeah.
In Martin's committee. So I really want us to be aware of that. Okay, thank you, folks. It was a slog yesterday and today. We're doing good. We're getting there.
Yes.
So let's go out if you two.